Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 230 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. Check them out at PerformBetter.com. I'm your host, Anthony Wren, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's where I keep all my podcasts, as well as Strength Coach TV and some other articles and other resources. All right, today on the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about some threads on StrengthCoach.com, including views on PRI, revisiting speed, and his lecture at the Power and Speed Summit, Everything Old is New Again. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to help you understand who your target market is. Lots of great questions that she asked to kind of figure that out. For the Functional Movement System segment, John Torine is on to finish his discussion on return to play. Our new segment, the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Dowdy will talk to Tim Robinson about his experience and positive results with athlete monitoring. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Rob Wilson. Rob owns and operates CrossFit Virginia Beach. He's the head coach of the Power Speed Endurance Breathe segment, as well as the Power Speed Endurance Tactical segment. He co-created the Art of Breath series with Brian McKenzie. So I love everything this guy's doing. I've been following him and Brian McKenzie and all about this breathing. I've been kind of getting into it a lot. So I had him come on, talk to us about how breathing affects movement, performance, and state. His video, Don't Be a Baby, the CO2 Tolerance Test, all about nasal breathing and the advantages of it, a little bit about carbon dioxide, breathing for performance, and so much more. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days. Just a buck. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have access, full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day, answering Saturdays, Sundays. He's always on. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All right. Well, we got a couple really good threads lately on the forum, and I was actually a little confused because PRI in general confuses me. I never took the course, so kind of getting that information from everybody else. But I wanted to somebody to ask you a question. I'll read this piece, and I want to talk to you about it. I think the key to having an understanding of PRI. You need to understand the concepts of impaired breathing and structural asymmetry based on handedness and anatomy just makes sense. The nonsense or lack of common sense comes in trying to use practices designed for rehab into training. A great deal of PRI works from a bias of a flexed spine. This has never been an effective weight room strategy. The only real PRI concept we currently use with healthy athletes is a greater emphasis on breathing. And this is why I wanted to get you on, because sometimes people don't, if they're not staying up to date with you, they'll think you use everything for PRI. You're still doing that PRI, kind of influenced warm up. Talk to us about, because I think the word, when you said the nonsense or lack of common sense comes in trying to use practices designed for rehab and training, you weren't talking about the PRI people. You're talking about the people that are using the PRI methods in training, right?
Exactly. And that's why I said, I think what happens is, and this is what sort of prompted the discussion, was it was a college strength coach who had an assistant who went to the PRI course. And I've seen this a couple times, and they come back and it's the same kind of situation where they ditch the program and suddenly everything's all about PRI. And the reality is I found the PRI stuff to be most helpful when I have someone who's actually got a problem. So if someone is suffering from some sort of back pain or neck pain or something like that. I think the PRI concepts are extremely helpful for those people. What we found, because we did look at some of the information and think, wow, this is really, really interesting. The effect that handedness has and the effect on the pelvis and a lot of these things. But I would say that there was no pathology a lot of times. Like there wasn't something really wrong with anybody. And so I think we played around with sort of, okay, let's try some kind of biasing some of the warm-ups, doing more on one side than on the other, some things that might be designed to correct the asymmetry. And I think I've said this a bunch of times in different settings. The athletes did not take to it at all. The athletes do not take to the idea. Yeah, a healthy athlete can't understand why you'd want him to do something on one side and not on the other. And it just, what we saw is it doesn't connect in their brain. And so it was difficult to say, okay, for instance, like if you look at some of the breathing stuff, we want somebody to get their right hand up over their head, and then somebody will turn around and they'll be doing it on the other side. What we found is every time we tried to do anything with a bias one way or the other, people automatically did the opposite side to the point where we were it was like we were correcting things that we didn't even need to correct, and then we were correcting the corrections. And it was just, it got a bit, I think onerous is a good word to describe it. So, but as I've said, the big thing is that it really, I think, solidified how important breathing was for us, because I think there'd been enough people talking about breathing, whether, Sue Falsoni, talking about the diaphragm being her favorite muscle 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I don't know when she came and did her presentation at MBSC, but it made some of that stuff kind of come to life for me. But the reality is, over time, and I think that's what happens to our program, is we try stuff and we see, does it work? And if not, there was never anything that in the long run profoundly changed what we were doing from a programming standpoint, except maybe a little bit more emphasis, as I said, on the breathing stuff. And then Jen, Brandon's wife, popped on and kind of corrected me, and she was right, saying that it's really not a flexion bias. It's trying to get people out of extension, which is different than a flexion bias, and she's correct. But what you started seeing happening in this, you'd seen this a lot in kind of videos and stuff on the internet, were people doing strength exercises in flexion with the idea that that's the way you're supposed to do it. And so, it goes kind of from a situation where you may be trying to correct rib position and solve some of these extension bias types of problems to people telling people to do things in flexion. So that I said, today's thread, I said it's PRI can be a little bit like a bad game of telephone in terms of, as people try to interpret what they experienced, it doesn't always come out right.
Absolutely. What's interesting today, I have Rob Wilson on, and Rob Wilson does the Art of Breath with Power, Speed, Endurance, and they've gone so deep into so many different kinds of breathing, and it's really interesting. So just interesting that PRI and the breathing stuff came up today. But you actually posted Tony Holler's article again. It's amazing because people get nuts over that article too. They love it. We get so many hits on Twitter, and it's probably the most engagement I probably ever get was with like Tony Holler stuff. But somebody had asked a question, because you had posted, you said, listen, 10 sprint facts revisited. You just want to remind people, hey man, read this again, let it sink in. We're still lifting weights. That might be your only lone point of contention with Tony, but somebody had asked you a question about it, and you have the different phases. Like, I think this is, again, the telephone idea is that people just think, they're coming into MBSC or doing some flying 10s right away and timing everybody. Just talk about those phases, and we'll get into some of the stuff you're talking about on speed at the Complete Speed and Power Summits.
What we just said, I think, and this is what I said at the Complete Speed and Power Summit, was that, this idea that, okay, I feel like you could simplify Tony's thing into saying, okay, if you want to get faster, run fast. And I literally had a slide that said, if you want to get faster, run fast. And it said, how fast? As fast as you can. How will I know if I'm getting faster? Time it. It's so, and the slide, it said like an aha or duh moment. Which one is it for you in terms of, for me, it was an aha moment, but it almost made me feel dumb in the sense that I can't believe I wasn't doing this. I can't believe I kind of said, Steve Bunker, who runs our North Andover, now our Middleton facility, has been adamant about timing 10s and using his timer. And we didn't do it. I think and some of it was just being lazy, setting up the timer, measuring out distance, doing all that stuff. And Steve was really adamant about it. And then Tony kind of came along, and I thought, wow, Steve's been right for a bunch of years and I've been wrong. So once again, we get the Mike Boyle was wrong, but now he's right thing going.
Coach, what do you have you now said, hey, look, it's so important, we're going to just kind of almost build it into the facility, like in that back room? Do you have something set up where it's like you don't have to set it up every time, or?
We set up a little lane. Nobody actually did. I should probably send out a picture of it. I'll try to do that today. They're like these little construction barrier things that we could make a lane, because the thing that we worry about now, when you've got people, when you're doing maximal speed sprinting, you get a lot more opportunities for people to run into each other. So we've had to be a little more conscientious about our setup, about we've got some netting, that sort of curtains off the room, and we're making sure we're pulling the netting, and we're making sure that we've got a lane set up, because again, you know me, I always talk about the Murphy's Law thing. Kids will do some incredibly dumb stuff in terms of like walking right through the area where people are running full speed sprints. And suddenly you get the combination maybe of a little middle school kid and a football player, and the football player is trying to run a time 10, and the middle school kid is walking across the lane. So we've had to dedicate some space, and we've had to be definitely more conscientious about what we're doing.
Coach, let's finish up, again, speed, everything old is new again. Was there anything new in that everything old is new again talk?
I don't think so, but I think other people thought so. The big thing to me was just the fact that we need to sprint, not run. And that's one of the things that Tony said in the article. Running won't make you faster. Sprinting will make you faster. Putting somebody in that situation of saying, okay, we're timing you. This is 100% effort. And the whole idea that Tony sort of reiterates in the article, when you start comparing, I just got Brian Mann's book back because I was trying to do some comparisons. I compared bar speed to sprinting speed, and bar speed in Olympic lifting is like 1.5 meters a second. Sprint speed in a 10-yard fly, 10-meter fly gets up around 10 yards, 10 meters per second. That's drastically different. And one of the things that I did is I just talked about, if you look at Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson, you could see two really divergently different body types, yet almost an identical result. One guy was a real kind of gym rat, steroid guy, really short, really stocky. The other guy, not that he didn't lift, but I don't think that lifting was as big a part of what they were doing, and was a little longer, a little lankier kind of body type. But yet, when you see that race, the difference between them was really, really minimal. And I think that's the stuff that I just wanted to reinforce for those. Like, I look at it, we're not going to stop lifting, but I do want people to understand that there may be two sides to this coin a little bit, in terms of, you got to look at this and think, Carl Lewis got there a different way than Ben Johnson did. And no one's saying, and I guess they are, I was going to say, no one's saying one's right and one's wrong, but the drug tests say that one was wrong.
Coach, how is this, somebody posted, Zidane, he had issued the sprint ban for Ronaldo. You were saying, look, the time to race is race day. So that, somebody can interpret that as a little bit contradictory.
Well, but I think that's what exactly. I think people have to look at that and think. That's one of the things that Tony had said. There's a difference between running sprints and racing. And racing, one of the things that a guy like that is going to do is on that 50-50 ball, he's going to try to outrun somebody else for the ball. One of the things that Tony really emphasizes is that you're always sprinting alone. You're not racing. And so there is, because I think, and you kind of start thinking about like nervous system stuff and, sympathetic effect of, kind of fight or flight, and you add the other person in and the race, and that may change what's going on. So I just think and it is maybe a little bit contradictory, because you look at it and think, for that guy, if he's out doing this, and this is what Tony's talking about. Tony's talking about, you're going to run fast twice a week, and then maybe I don't even know what he does once they start meets. Does he cut it down to once a week? We probably should ask him that question. But the point being is there's a very controlled volume of really high-speed sprinting. It's not just sort of random, going out and racing people and chasing people around. So that's where I think, saying to a guy like that, hey, I don't want you trying to beat people to the ball every day. I want you to beat people to the ball on game day. And not kind of, if we've got 6 bullets in the gun, let's save them all for Saturday or whenever we're playing Sunday, whatever it is, as opposed to going out and blowing it off during the week. But again, in a bigger picture, bigger program sense, there might be one other day where you say to him, hey, we want to open it up today for 2 sprints, 2 10s or 2 flying 10s or whatever it is, to challenge that system a little bit. So I guess I could see where people might view that as contradictory, and I might have to go back, particularly if somebody comments and flesh that out a little bit more.
Yep, good stuff. I'll remind everybody, Coach Boyle wrote an article, Rehab Injury, an Elite Fast Twitch Athlete, and that is under the thread of Zidane issues sprint ban for Ronaldo. It's also under the article section, and there was the views on PRI was what we were talking about with that with earlier with the PRI stuff. So, Coach, thanks for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks, Ian. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, right now, Perform Better. There is free shipping on orders over $59. Combine that with some of the sale items, and you got a pretty good deal. Restrictions do apply, so check out the site for more info. The summits are coming, and actually, I'll be speaking at the first one in Orlando that takes place on May 30th, June 3rd. I'm pretty excited. It's the first time I'm speaking for Perform Better. It's going to be talking about the 7 things that I learned from 50 of the top fitness professionals. Has to do with the book that I have coming out this summer on success in the fitness industry. So excited for that. Hope to see you there. The next one-day seminar is in Tacoma on May 12th with Brandon Marcello, Todd Durkin, Rachel Cosgrove, and Martin Rooney. You can check them out. All that information out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Hi, welcome to Trainer Heroic's Data-Driven Coaching segment. I'm Adam Doughty. I'm joined here by Tim Robinson. Say hi, Tim.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, so Tim is as a former collegiate coach. He came to us from Illinois College in Jacksonville, Illinois. But he's been all over the place. So why don't you tell us about that real quick, Tim?
Yeah, so I started coaching college football in the junior college ranks. Then I moved up to the NCAA Division II, Division III, and I actually had a strength and conditioning internship at the University of Colorado, which was great. So I've seen competition at every level.
Cool. So what we want to talk about today is to kind of continue investigating this kind of idea of athlete monitoring. And so one thing that comes up when we kind of bring up this topic to coaches is this fear that if I ask my guys questions about readiness or wellness or whatever it is, and they give bad answers, like they score poorly, then it's going to have some kind of like nocebo effect where this thing that shouldn't hurt them makes them not try as hard or makes them perform worse. But as I understand it, in your experience, that's not the case. So I'd really like to hear about how you use monitoring and what happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would periodically meet with our guys, and I would talk about certain topics, including fatigue, nutrition, goal setting. What I came to find out was that the guys were a little overstressed and they weren't performing at an optimal level. So what we did is we actually took our 4-day split. switched it to a 3-day split to give them a little more time outside of the weight room so they can focus on other things. And we still found that they were making PRs, We focused on quality over quantity and focused on the guys taking ownership over those lifts. I could have been bullheaded and stuck with the way I was doing things, but my decision was to adapt, and it turned out for the positive for us.
That's really interesting, Tim. So yeah, as you said, like if you're kind of collecting this information and athletes know it, you have to be responsive somehow. Even if you don't change everything, you have to kind of give some feedback saying, hey, I hear you guys. I hear you're tired. We're going to keep pushing. If that's your choice, that's your choice. But you chose something different.
That's right. And my voice in the weight room didn't change. The underlying philosophy of how we operate didn't change. We just made one little switch. It was a little scheduling switch, and it turned out for the better for the guys, not only in the weight room, but in their lives, in their academic lives. So it was good all around.
That's great. So what happened was you both saw that they maybe weren't performing as well in the weight room as they should have been.
Correct.
When you saw them.
Yeah.
You did these kind of like periodic interviews.
Yeah.
Because kind of like it's a monitoring.
That's what it is.
You're kind of following up on their fatigue and stress and all this.
Right.
Which is it's a survey. Kind of same idea. So you got in front of them. You got to build this relationship by asking them how they were.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing we know is that like there is a psychological underpinning when you ask somebody for their input is that they feel more invested in the process, right?
Yeah.
They have more intrinsic motivation, right? They feel like they want to contribute and do it versus you just telling them what to do, that extrinsic motivation.
Correct.
We know this intrinsic motivation lasts longer, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. That's our time for today. Go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our team members, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
It's Rachel Cosgrove with Results Fitness University, and this is the Business of Fitness segment on the Strength Coach podcast. And today I want to really dig into who your target market is. I think as a business owner, it's really easy to get caught up in trying to figure out the next marketing campaign you're going to do, or the next, whatever the next idea is. I mean, we have so many ideas constantly getting bombarded, and we forget to take a couple steps back and really sit down and look at who are we actually selling to? Who are we actually targeting? Who is that person? Do you really know them? Do you know them, down to the detail of, what their day is like? So I just want to run you through some questions, and I want you to think about who that client is. Really, as you are working with your clients, again, our clients are not the same. We're not the same as our clients. And so really taking that time to put yourself in the shoes of your client will set you up to be able to create an environment that's very specific for that client. And here's the key. If you are for everybody, then you're for nobody. So it's better to get super specific and really targeted with who you are building your business for. That way you are building everything for that very specific person. So know your target market. So here's some questions. I just want you to go ahead, get your pens and papers out and start thinking about and write down, who are, as you think about your clients and who they are, what's their day like? Like when they wake up in the morning and their alarm clock goes off, what's on their mind? What are they thinking about? Who do they have to take care of? I know for us, we have a lot of caretakers that come to Results Fitness. And, so that's, first thing in the morning, they might be thinking about how they got to get the kids' lunches packed, how they got to, maybe take care of the husband. And a lot of them have their own careers and their own, agenda for the day. And so, what is their day like? What are the things that are, that are filling their time throughout their day? What keeps them awake at night? What are some of the things that they worry about? Are they laying awake worrying about, maybe it's, that their parents are getting older, or maybe, as their parents are getting, maybe someone's in the hospital, or maybe, as their kids are growing up, are their kids going to, be successful, or, what are the things that they lay awake and think about? Or is it themselves, really as they're getting older, do they want to really make sure that they're going to be able to keep up with their kids, or maybe be able to take care of their parents? I know those are very real worries for a lot of our clients, are, really as they are aging, really realizing that, they want to make sure they have control over continuing to be able to do the things that they want to do. So think about that. What keeps them awake at night? What are they mad at or mad about? So what really fires them up? What is like the, like the thing, like people will take action out of, avoiding something, right? Out of avoiding pain or out of avoiding, they're either avoiding pain or gaining pleasure. And so if you can really nail down, like, what is it that they're mad about? What really fires them up and gets them motivated? And what are their top 3 daily frustrations? Like throughout their day, what comes up that really, frustrates them, and that, they would like, maybe it's something to do with, they can't. I know we've had clients tell us stories of, that they would head out to lunch with their friends, at lunch at work, and they're trying to keep up. And they actually, like one of our clients who was really overweight and obese, one of her motivations was that she couldn't keep up to walk to lunch. And so she ended up just staying back at the office and eating lunch by herself because she was unable to walk fast enough to keep up with her friends to walk out to lunch. And so something like that obviously is going to be a huge motivation. So what are their frustrations? What are their top daily 3 frustrations? What's their single biggest pain or problem? Like I said, they will be motivated to avoid pain. So just, really thinking through, I always say it's like a movie playing in their head when they first come in to hire you. They say that they want to lose weight, or they say they want to drop 2 sizes, or, they say these goals that they might share with you. But as you sit and listen to them and talk to them and ask them why, more than once, you can get deeper into why do they want to lose 10 pounds, or why do they want to drop 2 sizes, and really get to, it's usually not that the 10 pounds, the 2 sizes is not what matters. It's actually, there's a deeper reason. There's something, that's, and they may or may not tell you, especially until you've really built that trust with them, they may not share it with you. But the more you can really figure out that trigger that is really going to motivate them, to keep them, coming back and to keep them getting those results. And then, that trigger, once you learn these things about your target market, now you can build your marketing material, you can build your gym, you can build everything specific for that person. So one of the best places to get your marketing copy is from your current clients. So interview them. Where were they when they joined your gym? Where are they now? Use some of their language, because you'll never come up with as good of language as you'll get from listening to your clients. So this next week, I just want all of you to sit down and really take some time to listen to your clients, interview them, get to know them. Who are they? What are they worrying about? Really get down to the nitty gritty of who is this person that you are building this business for? Because if you know that, you're going to be able to help more people. So take action on that, and have a great week, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you on the next segment. So go ahead and head on over to resultsfitnessuniversity.com if you want to check out any of our upcoming live events. We keep our schedule up to date over there, so we hope to see you at one of those soon.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, and today I have on Rob Wilson, who's a human performance specialist with 15 plus years in manual therapy, both as a practitioner and a teacher. He resides in Virginia Beach, where he owns and operates CrossFit Virginia Beach since 2006, one of the 102, I believe, one of the originals almost. He's worked at a variety of athletes ranging from amateur to internationally ranked, from powerlifting to sailboat racing, as well as individuals in the U.S. Naval Special Warfare Program. He was an original member of the Mobility WOD staff under Kelly Starrett. He is the head coach of the Power, Speed, Endurance, Breathe segment, as well as the PSE Tactical segment. He's also the co-creator of the Art of Breath series with Brian McKenzie, who you might know from the book Unplugged. And Brian has CrossFit Endurance in California. And they work closely with Stanford Neuroscience Department on this. So I've been following them the last couple months. The Wim Hof stuff that you guys know from my interview with Scott Carney. I've been following that, and that led me to Rob and Brian. So Rob, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, I love all the stuff that you're doing on Power, Speed, Endurance, PSE, and some of the videos that you have put up, the educational videos about this. But like I told you before, I'm still new to really getting a little bit more advanced in this. So I have everything kind of jumbled in my brain, and I'm like, I got to call Rob and get him on. And like I told you, it's not for the audience. It's really just for me.
For personal development.
Yeah. And I love the quote in, I think, the book Oxygen Advantage, and even in one of your articles, I think you can last several weeks without food, several days without water, but you can survive just minutes without breath. And, I think breathing in general really started to get, I don't know, not popular, but more people started paying attention to it in the strength and conditioning community a few years back. And it was really just through belly breathing and like crocodile breaths and just making sure people were breathing, I guess maybe in through the nose and out through the mouth, but that was only during that kind of little bit of a sequence. And PRI came along, and it was a little more in depth with certain positions on your back, feet up, like blowing up balloons, etc. Personally, I got into the Wim Hof stuff, and that's more of the hyperventilation with breath holds. For sometimes up to two to 3 minutes. And that led me to you guys. And now I've been really getting into nasal breathing, not only just walking around, but in my training. You guys turned me on to the book Oxygen Advantage, which is a really good entry-level nasal breathing book about, really just in general health. But for me, the performance is where it's at. And you're doing the Art of Breath clinics. So I want you to talk about, just give us a brief overview of the clinics, what you're doing with those. And then I want you to talk about how you start that out. You talk about how breathing affects movement and mechanics, performance, and state.
All right. Well, I'll try to tie all that up in a nice bow for you. So, the idea with the Art of Breath seminar is, and just to kind of segue off of what you were talking about, right? There was like just a little bit about it. Yoga community has been using it. Then you have like PRI, and then over here it's Wim Hof, and then you got, you might be exposed to Jill Miller, and then on and on. And it's like, well, which one is what, and how do I reconcile all of these viewpoints? And what we found was that Brian and I, through our own personal practices and from working with others, that there was not a common language that could describe the underlying principles that was going on underneath the surface of all of these seemingly disparate practices. And the idea was to distill the essence of some of these historical and some modern practices, distill them down into their most basic components, and then create a language that could describe and secularize those components so that they could be applied universally, regardless of community or interest, and so that those communities could then find a more direct way to communicate with and help one another develop. And so that's the idea behind the Art of Breath, is we distill things down into principles. We're not super concerned with methods. So we want to know, what does something actually do, and why does it do that thing? And then do away with any sort of romanticized language that's based around that thing, and then create some kind of communication that will allow us to talk about it more universally, so that an individual can basically modify their personal practice based on what their needs are. So that's the sort of art component, is that I can find out what the universal principles are to something, and then I can decide what I want. And, the kind of difference, I think, is you can want to share an art with somebody. Like, for example, if I was going to teach you how to paint, I could say, paint a horse, and here's the paint, and here are the colors you're going to use, right? And that sort of loses its luster. That paint by numbers sort of way of doing things kind of can lose its luster. But if I say, hey, here's what different brush sizes and different brush strokes do, and when you combine colors like this, this is the effect you get, then I just leave you with a palette, and you can create whatever you want because you actually understand how to paint. And that's the idea, is for us to just be providers of information, education, give some direction, but then ultimately allow people to make their own discoveries. And the only way that you can do that is to distill things down to their most sort of common denominators. And in the program, the 3 points of the triangle, or the 3 pillars, if you will, of the program are state, mechanics, and physiology. We decided to appoint those terms to these concepts, but they show up on their own, and really just through our work with other individuals and groups of people, they just sort of kept self-appointing. And what we found was that state is basically your ability to control your level of arousal with specific breath practices. And that can mean, a lot of times the more common terms are sort of like emotion, cognition, capacity to learn, but arousal specifically is measurable. And that term as applied to sort of brain function is something that I learned from Dr. Andrew Huberman of Huberman Labs at Stanford University. And some things like mindfulness and meditation are very hard to measure and then therefore difficult to change. And while admittedly, those practices, while very old, don't necessarily fit very well into performance environments, especially in a culture as secularized as a Western industrial culture where we prefer metrics of data. And so I think it's really, really important that we ascribe things values so that we can decide if we're making progress. So that's the state components. I can basically control my mind with breath because they are inextricably linked. There's actually a portion of your brain that's singularly devoted to managing your breath and then communicating that breath pattern with your emotive and cognitive capacities. And then we have mechanics, which is basically, in specific reference to the breath, we're talking about your ability to ventilate properly. And so the actual physical act of drawing air in and pushing air out of the body is technically called ventilation. And ventilation sometimes can seem pretty complicated, but really there's just a wave of breath that starts in the lower part of your rib cage, and like a wave pattern goes from the lower part through the middle and into the upper part, and allows you to maximize your lung volume, basically, so that you have a greater chance of oxygen coming in and out, oxygen in the system and carbon dioxide out. And what we also know about ventilation is basically your ability to ventilate properly is a root function in other things like your ability to ambulate, right? So our ability just to learn how to crawl as babies and then walk as toddlers is completely dependent on our ability to breathe well and to create pressure with the diaphragm. So very, very important stuff. And in fact, they find that in childhood development, if in children who have respiratory difficulty, they tend to explore ambulation much later. So they actually have developmental problems around crawling and walking if they have chronic respiratory conditions. So super important. And then the third sort of tier or third pillar is physiology. In specific reference to the breath, understanding the true capacity for enhancing and optimizing the chemical release of oxygen into the body as fuel, and also enhancing the proliferation of mitochondria due to specific challenges in that process. So a lot of us think that, hey, I'm going to do aerobic work or endurance work. Like that's the common thing. Like, oh, I'm going to do my endurance portion of my conditioning. And if I go past, 15 or 20 minutes, I'm aerobic. That's sort of the common thought. Or if I stay at this heart rate, I'm being aerobic. And that's not necessarily the case. And something like, if you read The Oxygen Advantage, this is something that Patrick McCune goes into great detail about, that there are these tremendous barriers between air going into the system and oxygen actually getting released as a fuel source in muscle tissue. And that the way that we breathe can either help us optimize that process or can become a tremendous hindrance to that process, right? And so taking care to understand not only how we're breathing, when we're in what we call a formal breathing practice, where you're like sitting next to your bed being quiet when no one's home. How can we take what we learn and put it into a performance environment where there are a lot more variables to deal with and a higher level of stress, and then still be able to use the same or similar strategies in order to optimize our performance outcomes? So that's the idea behind the art of breath, is sort of take these root concepts and be able to apply them in a lot of different scenarios in a lot of different ways, but to boil them down into the sort of simplest components.
Yeah. Obviously that's why for me, it's become, challenging from the perspective of getting my head around things a little bit. Cause I went from kind of just feeling like, okay, you can do some belly breathing, like you talked about, when it's quiet or at the beginning of a workout, or people are prescribing it at the end of a workout. That's kind of how so many people think of this. And for me, it was really basic. And now I have all these concepts that I'm learning, and it's like, wow. And I've seen minor changes over the last month or so from, just being on the erg alone and trying to, and figuring some stuff out. But let's take a step back with the mechanics a little bit, because I want to talk to you about this idea. You had a video about don't be a baby. Like people always say, breathe like a baby, be like a baby, breathe like a baby. And there's this idea of seeing your belly expand. And I know Brian McKenzie showed the video on PSE about the breath wave. So I'm a little confused, because I've heard even with the oxygen advantage, it talks about breathing light, not showing, not showing a lot of movement. Can you talk about the proper mechanics?
Sure. Well, one thing is to know that mechanics are variable depending on the stressor that's being imposed on the system. And to think that there's one universal way that a person should breathe is sort of silly, right? And so there's going to be different things that your body is going to prioritize depending on what it's being asked to do. As a baseline, we look at a breath wave, right? So if I was sitting or lying down, we would look to see that the rib cage would expand circumferentially, right? So it would expand outward like a circle getting larger. If you were looking at the top down, like someone's head down to their feet, you're standing in a chair looking over them, you would want to see the bottom ribs moving down and out first, and then the space in between each rib on the rib cage would also be getting larger, and that wave would flow up through the system, and depending on the depth of the breath, may end up in the chest as well. Now, I think the reason that this sort of cue of breathe in your belly has become popular is because so many people breathe only into their chest and neck and have no connection to the function of their diaphragm. Now, here's a couple of misnomers. One, the thing about babies is that they're easy to kill. And which sounds like a horrible thing to say, and I hope by saying it, I've woken some people back up who fell asleep during my Art of Breath seminar diatribe earlier. But the thing is that babies aren't very capable, and there are very, very few demands on their structure. And so babies, as a result, babies are very undeveloped. And as a result, for example, the way that their thorax functions is much different than an adult human. It's much smaller relative to the size of their organ systems. And because of all the compression, they have no choice but for their belly to move. But you can't load a baby. Babies don't move fast. They can't navigate through complex spatial problems. The demands are very low on their system. And the only time that we breathe similar to a baby at all is when humans are asleep or deeply, deeply relaxed. But if your belly is moving in and out, it's impossible to create any stability. If I put a heavy load on your back and you breathe with your belly, you will almost certainly sacrifice your spine, because your diaphragm also is largely responsible for creating and maintaining stability in your trunk while you deal with force. And if I'm breathing with my belly, I'm going to give away basically the container that holds the pressure between my respiratory diaphragm and my pelvic diaphragm, which is going to basically make me compromise position and rely more on my spinal segments for stability rather than the pressure of my trunk. So our diaphragm actually has 3 responsibilities inside of our body. One is ventilation, right? It moves the ribs down and out as we inhale so that there's room for the lower lobes of the lungs to inflate. The second is responsible for digestive function. It's the part that's closer to your spine is actually a sphincter for the esophagus. So when you vomit and your stomach and your diaphragm contracts, that's what actually reverses the direction of food and pushes it out of your throat. Totally gross, but true, right? Mm-hmm. And then the third is it creates a mechanical function. It's responsible for stability. And it's never, people like say your diaphragm is not working. And the reality is that your diaphragm is always, it's engaged in some way. It's just a matter of if it's engaged properly. And if we give up sort of proper organization of the rib cage relevant to the pelvis, then what's going to happen is my diaphragm is not going to move in a way that optimizes any of those capacities. So if I overarch my back, my diaphragm gets stretched out, I can't breathe fully and I can't create good pressure. If my back is rounded, I can't breathe fully, I can't create good pressure. So the idea is that I want to have a function of my breath that is as versatile as possible, because the demands on the structure of an adult, especially an adult athlete, are much higher than the demands on a baby. And I think what we tend to do, because our culture often asks so much of adults in the way of busyness, and we sort of sacrifice our bodies at the altar of, long-term money making and retirement, is we tend to romanticize the life of a child. Children, look how children play, look how children learn, look how children breathe. And that's all really nice. And I love kids. Like personally, I'm a person who likes kids. I totally respect where that idea is coming from. And I enjoy seeing the innocence of children, especially because it's easy to become cynical as an adult. But the demands that are placed on their physiology by life are far different than an adult, especially an adult who's an active athlete. And if you want to talk about performance, then you need a strategy that's versatile. And if you don't have one, you're bound to make some serious errors in judgment for how you're going to apply this work. Now, that being said, I understand the point of the cue, and it's kind of like, 5-10 years ago when people were like squat in your heels, and it's like, hey man, you have a whole foot. Mm-hmm. But if you were starting to teach people how to squat, like when squatting started to come back in vogue, like 15 years ago, you saw a lot of people squatting on their toes, which is a real problem. So if you said, hey, go towards your heels, it was a cue that would solve a problem in real time. Just like if you see someone breathing up into their shoulders, an easy cue is to say, hey, breathe into your belly. That doesn't mean it's the best cue. It just means it's an easy cue to get someone to change their behavior, right? So I just think we have to be a little bit more specific about what we're asking and then learn how to communicate that well. And that's the idea with what we do in the Art of Breath. We give some really, really simple exercises and some simple examples in the seminar to show people, hey, this is what we really mean. Here's how it should feel. Here's a few different circumstances to try this so you can see how it should feel for yourself.
Yeah. Is that just basically you're trying to put them in different positions that they're going to be in, whatever their sport, like whether it's on a bike or a rower or running or standing or in.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we're like, hey, if you can't breathe here is a strategy to improve your mechanics so that you can. So like one position that we use a lot, which I think is incredibly versatile for athletes, is the hollow body position from gymnastics, right? In the hollow body, you see people doing that with their legs and arms outstretched and they're rocking back and forth, but often they're sort of letting their trunk position just go to complete dog shit. And if you understand the hollow position, it's really about, hey, can I organize my pelvis and my trunk and then maintain that organization when I introduce other variables like momentum and leverage, right? So if you just think about it from the standpoint of physics, it's about organizing your pelvis and your spine and rib cage, holding all that with your abs, and then adding leverage with your arms and legs, and then movement, which is just momentum, right? And then I should also be able to breathe in that position. And we do a balloon test that will show a sort of comparative volume to when somebody's sitting in neutral. And hey, if you can't breathe, you can't fill up this balloon in this position, you might be missing some range of motion, you're missing some control. And then we give people some easy strategies to create solutions for those problems. So, it might be like, hey, your hips are really tight. So we'll have them do a specific stretch. And then afterwards, they get back in the position and blow the balloon back up. And lo and behold, I did something that didn't seem like it was related to my ability to breathe well, but it turns out it's all connected, right? If my hips are super tight, I can't keep my pelvis in the right position. If my pelvis isn't in the right position, my spine's not making the right shape. If my spine's not making the right shape, my ribs can't expand. If my ribs can't expand, I can't breathe. If I can't breathe, I can't brace, right? Yeah. So we start to show people like, hey, there's this progression, there's this line of action. And once you start to understand, you go, oh man, holy crap, I'm giving away all of these things that can help me perform. And it's low-hanging fruit, right? And that's the really cool thing about breath practice and sport is nobody can say like, well, dude, we don't breathe in my sport. That's ridiculous, right? Everybody is breathing. If you're a coach, you can't be like, my athletes don't breathe, right? Yeah. Your athletes breathe. They're going to breathe anyway. So why not introduce a strategy that's going to optimize the outcome for a behavior they have to do no matter what?
Yeah, that's where the power is too, because A, it's a low barrier for entry, and B, you're not doing it, you're not taking up any more time. It's kind of why I've gravitated towards, I've moved away from some of the Wim Hof, the hyperventilation breathing with the breath holds, only because it's a separate 15-minute practice. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I got enough going on right now. It's like, at least with some of the stuff that you guys are doing, I can employ it into my workout that I'm doing already. So it's not really taking any more time.
Yeah, well, and that's the idea ultimately, is for it to become integrative, right? And I think a formal practice, what we would call a formal practice, which would be separate from your strength and conditioning practice or your sport, can be really helpful when you're trying to get a specific result, help yourself relax, get brightened up for the day. I mean, it has a place and I really enjoy it. But my formal practice isn't as nearly in depth as people would think as far as how much time is required, because I usually go into it with a specific intention. And really the primary thing, people are like, well, how much practice do you spend on your breath? I'm like, all my waking hours. How about that? Because I'm breathing anyway. And so whenever I'm playing my sport, which for me personally is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm aware of it when I'm warming up. I'm aware of it when I'm cooling down. I'm aware of it when I do strength and conditioning in the gym. I'm aware of it. I'm teaching it to athletes. So it's a big part of my life personally, but still, right now I'm busy. I'm filming a webinar right now. And, when we're doing that, I'm up in the morning, like this morning at, 5:00, and I'm on the computer already. I have my first cup of coffee, take a few breaths, hang out with my dog, and then I'm like, all right, I need to get some work done because, I'm under the gun for some deadlines right now, and I don't want to sit for 15 minutes and breathe. Yeah. But I can stay aware of how I'm breathing while I'm doing other things. Why can't I?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why
I employ what I know. So if you have a breath practice, it's 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night, but you don't do it for the rest of the day, it's basically, it's not completely canceled out, but it's not nearly as powerful as making it an integrative approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about baselines. You guys talk about a CO2 tolerance test. Just give us an idea about that test and what's it going to tell us.
Well, the CO2 tolerance test is originally borrowed from the freediving community, and they use the CO2 tolerance test. So just to be more specific about what exactly it is, it's the ability to tolerate carbon dioxide in the body, right? And that's really important because carbon dioxide and oxygen have an inverse relationship. So in order to be able to release oxygen at higher levels of metabolic stress, you have to have a high tolerance for carbon dioxide. Otherwise, your rate of breath starts to increase and you blow off excess CO2. And this is all based on the Bohr effect. So if anybody wants to look up the biochem, I'm not going to bore you with it here, but you can look up Bohr effect, BOHR effect. And there's plenty of YouTube videos and things, or you can read The Oxygen Advantage. It's described in detail in that book. But the idea was that the freediving community would use this to find a baseline for apnea tables so that they could hold their breath longer and longer while they're underwater. And I don't know if you've ever met any freedivers or had any freedivers on the show.
No.
Uber mellow people, super mellow. Like, hey man, are you dead? Mellow. Really, really chilled out folks. And it's because the rate of respiration gets so low for them. But really the idea is that the carbon dioxide tolerance test, so we started using it once we learned about the physiology as a baseline for oxidative capacity, your ability to process oxygen in the body. And what we found is it's not only incredibly predictive of aerobic capacity and pulmonary health specifically, but also it's an incredible predictor of psycho-emotional stress. And this is from our work with Huberman Labs at Stanford University that, they were basically doing protocols to see how people were reacting to fear and anxiety. And they have a fear lab at Stanford where basically in Dr. Huberman's lab, they put people in a virtual reality environment and take all kinds of metrics, EEG, vision-based tests, like pupil size, perspiration, heart rate, and carbon dioxide levels. And what we found is that ability to tolerate carbon dioxide in the system is incredibly predictive of emotional reactivity. And we've actually gone as far as to create algorithms with an emotional reactivity test that was developed at Harvard that people can basically get a score, and then they can be assigned a very specific breath protocol that is specific to their physiology based on that test in the present. And that's how precise carbon dioxide tolerance is. And the other cool thing is it's not a correlate, so like a lot of correlates we get, like heart rate, are based on a wearable. And the downside of a wearable is it's completely dependent on accuracy and calibration. And a lot of those devices are very poorly calibrated, and their readouts are not very trustworthy. But your level of carbon dioxide tolerance changes like day to day, hour to hour, even sometimes moment to moment. I could do your carbon dioxide tolerance test right now. We could do a breath protocol and it would change. And this is one of the things we do in the seminar is we have people throughout the day do this test and then show them how different things can change it in different ways. Some things, hey, this made it get worse. This made it get better. And it's very, very simple. It's basically, if anybody at home wants to try this, you don't need anything other than a stopwatch. So you take a seat on the floor in a comfortable position, or you lie down on your back. And the breath basically includes 4 breaths. Your first 3 are normal, full inhale and full exhale. So and this is all through your nose, full inhale, full exhale. Your 4th breath is a full inhale. You hit your stopwatch. So you start timing and you time the duration of the longest exhale possible, also through the nose. Now, if during that test you run out of air, you get stressed out, or you have to pause for any reason, you stop the stopwatch. So it's a continuous exhale. You time the duration of your last continuous exhale for as long as you can. And that's a carbon dioxide tolerance test. And it's so simple, but it has been so incredibly accurate in its capacity to predict where people are and how you should start with them that it's been quite astounding how accurate it is. And even at the lab in Stanford, it's been resoundingly surprising how accurate it is.
Now, how long, like if somebody listening at home and they want to know kind of how they did, roughly what would be like an average score? What would be a good score?
We find that average, like mathematically average, is like 30 to 40 seconds. 40 to 60 is like needs improvement, but would improve quickly with understanding of how to breathe. Like people who are in the 40 to 60 range and learn the mechanics jump quickly, assuming that they're not under any exorbitant amount of stress. People under 40 or 30, people who are in that lower continuum, tend to be, they tend to be really poor pulmonarily and need a lot of improvement. They usually have a decent amount of reactivity to environmental stress, but it can be seriously improved upon. And then anything above 60, we would consider like good. That doesn't mean don't work on it, but it just means like, hey, you're doing pretty good already. These folks tend to be pretty mellow in demeanor and not quite as type A. These people tend to be pretty like, it tends to be more of a predictor of personality, which is crazy. You would think that's kind of crazy, but your autonomic nervous system, the tone of that system really affects the function of your body and your ability to up and downshift through different states. Yeah. I mean, if you're in that sort of 40-ish realm, which is average, you can probably see a good bump just by addressing mechanics. But anything less than that, and you need to do some serious work. Now, the lowest I've ever seen is 8. So the person could only exhale continuously for 8 seconds. And this individual, nice young lady, but she had anxiety disorder. And when we started to do her breath work, she couldn't inhale or exhale any longer than about 3 seconds because it would start to trigger a panic attack. And she couldn't pause at all. So if she tried to hold her breath even for a second, it would make her very nervous. And we're talking about somebody, though, who was living on about a Xanax a day. And after about a month of very simple work, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, she went from a Xanax a day to 1 Xanax in 30 days. Wow. Which is pretty tremendous by any normal metric. And has the potential to be tremendously life-changing for somebody to know that they have that much control over how they feel. Really, really amazing. And what it is just developing a more direct connection with the actual physiology instead of relying on correlates. And that's really what it boils down to, is what is really going on in my system, giving that thing a name, ascribing a value to it. And then once you can measure something and you can name it, then you can change it and you can talk about it. But until then, it's just some ambiguous thing that seems ethereal.
Yeah. Good stuff. And I'll have a link for everybody to you guys have on the PSE site. You can take the test and they show you some protocols and
so, yeah. So there's a free version, right? There's a free version where you could just go on, do your CO2 tolerance test, input it, and then sort of just try some stuff out for yourself, which is pretty fun to do. And then there's also, like, if you want to do a deep dive, you can do a breath assessment, which is you do the test, you take the CO2 tolerance test, you do the emotional reactivity scale, and then we will give you a protocol specific for you.
Very cool. Rob, talk to us about, give us some of the advantages of nasal breathing. Like I said before, a lot of people are going to say, listen, it's just not practical in the gym, maybe breathing in through the nose, but I want to do some, I don't think it's practical in my conditioning to do mouth out, et cetera. We're going to hear all of that. I've been playing around with it. You can certainly do it. Give us the advantages of nasal breathing.
Well, yeah. So this is like a twofold question. I love this question. It's probably one of the most common things I get. It's definitely the most common objection I get. Mm-hmm. Right. And I always say this. I wonder if anybody would argue that your feet are the part of your body designed or adapted for you to run on. Probably not. Yeah. Right? Of course not. It's ridiculous. They're structurally, you can look at it. There's people that have described the windlass effect. There's this sort of elastic component of the plantar fascia and, the way the Achilles, wraps around the calcaneus and creates this elasticity that allows us to pick our foot up, blah, blah, blah. People know that, and nobody in strength and conditioning argues it, right?
But the structure on our face that had adapted for breathing and has all the mechanisms to deal with air, we argue about whether or not it should be done because it's harder to develop. And the reality is that your nose has all the structural components that allow us to optimize oxygen going into the system. Not my opinion, right? Your nose has hair. That's a filter. I mean, my daughter just uses it as a source of comedy. She thinks nose hair is funny, and I'm getting old, so mine's turning white. So she likes to point that out. But other than its comedic effect, nose hair is for filtering particles, right? That's the point. It filters particulates that are in the air so they don't go in your lungs. Now, past that, we have sinuses, right? There's mucous membranes that trap even smaller particles. We release T cells, so you actually have immune function of the sinuses as air passes by. Nitric oxide is released, which is a vasodilator. The air is humidified and warmed, which is super important if you want oxygen to diffuse well from the lungs into the blood. So it's actually designed to optimize your capacity to transfer oxygen into your body. The reason people don't like it is because their posture is terrible. Their ventilation mechanics have gone to shit, and they don't have control over the rate and depth of their breath. And so their sinuses close up. And not to mention that most of the food we eat is highly inflammatory. Sinuses are usually partially closed. Then you have people who are like, hey, well, I had my nose broken. I have a deviated septum. Can't use that excuse. Brian McKenzie's broken his nose like somewhere between like 3 and 5 times or something. And he just put his time in and his nose functions just fine. He can breathe better through his nose than most anybody I know. It just takes time to develop the capacity. And once you do, you don't want to use your mouth anymore. Maybe to exhale, but it becomes very temporary. You're like, oh man, I don't want to be here, right? Because your mouth gets dry. You don't feel like the air is as useful. I rarely open my mouth to inhale, even when I lift very heavy, because I just ask the capacity to develop through progression over time. And now even doing something like, heavy power cleans, I can keep my mouth closed other than in late sets when I'm going very, very heavy and there's a release of pressure through noise, like that, that is the catch noise. Mm-hmm. But other than that, pressurizing the set and all that, nose only. So, your nose is really meant for that. And then that's sort of part one. Then part two is, if you think about it like this, like it's a gear, right? So I'm also not saying never use your mouth. I'm just saying know why you're doing it, right? And that most of your breathing should be done with the part of your face designed for breathing, right? Just like our nose, our olfactory sense has a lot to do with the way that we taste food, but we don't shove food up our nose, right? We should be able to smell food because it's part of taste, but nobody shoves food up their nose so they can taste it better. That's ridiculous, right? So we just need to know that, yes, can you breathe with your mouth? Obviously, yes. The only advantage to breathing with your mouth is that it potentially can bring in higher volumes very quickly. So it's really useful during recovery after very high bouts of intensity or work to exhaustion. It can be really helpful for, 5 to 10 breaths of getting real high volumes of air in. But after that, you want to downshift out of there as soon as you can because it's not as effective as actually getting oxygen in the system, which is the point. The point isn't to get more air in. The point is to get more oxygen in.
Rob, why do I need to breathe out through the nose?
There's actually a secondary uptick that happens as you exhale where oxygen, again, is reabsorbed into the system. Now, when you breathe out through the nose, the other component here is that you're going to offload less carbon dioxide. And like we talked about earlier, there's an inverse relationship between carbon dioxide and oxygen. And if you want to develop your capacity to tolerate carbon dioxide in the system, and you should, then breathing with your mouth is going to offload carbon dioxide faster, and you're going to reduce your capacity to effectively process oxygen. Now, that being said, there is sort of a gear at very high, again, at higher levels of intensity and sometimes higher levels of pressure where you need to release more air with your mouth. But it's long after most people think. And I'll tell you this, if you give the nasal development its sort of due, like you challenge yourself for a month, on anything conditioning, I'm only going to breathe through your nose. Let your ego suck it up. Only breathe through your nose for a month. I promise you, you will not want to go back, because your capacity will develop so much. And you do it for a year, or even if you do it for 3 months, it's unbelievable. And on top of that, your nasal structures are innervated by the vagus nerve, which is goes to the system that tells your body, hey, relax. When you're relaxed, nobody is doing this. That's closer to a panic state, right? Mm. Have you ever played a field sport, like contact sport or anything?
Hockey, ice hockey.
Played ice hockey. Mm. Perfect. So you're on the ice and you see somebody going, is that an intimidating competitor?
Not really.
Of course not. Ridiculous. You know that person is burnt, and if they get the puck, you're going to aim for them. Yeah. In fact, everyone will, right? Yeah. Oh, man, this guy's toast. But you see somebody who goes, you're like, oh, shit, this guy's serious business. He's focused, right? So there is some intuitive sense around that we all sort of accept until we're asked to do it. And then everybody's like, I'm out. It's harder.
Yeah. Well, how do you kind of progress people into this? Give us your protocol into getting people to understand that. Is it just, almost like the oxygen advantage, like do it while you're walking and then, do it while you're warming up, or, talk to us about how you get people into this.
Yeah, I mean, generally we start with do it while you're doing your daily activities, and then do it while you're engaged in your warm up. Specifically, that's probably the easiest time, because one of the things is when you first start breathing nose only, you go slower, and people don't like that, right? So it's very hard at first to keep up your level of pace or intensity breathing slow through your nose. Now, over time, if you can check your ego, it'll become a very valuable tool. And what we've also figured out is that just because you're breathing through your nose doesn't necessarily mean automatically that you're breathing slow, right? And so we're actually developing a program right now, which should be out soon, called Energy System Control. And there's actually a spectrum of rate and depth of breath that I can do with my nose, right? So you can breathe slow like this. Or we can do like the Kabbalabati, like you and I were talking about earlier, like this, right? Those are both with my nose, but the speed and depth have changed. And so learning how to integrate those into a performance environment can be a very valuable tool. And sequentially developing that is what we really tried to do at Power Speed Endurance, so like you said, like we have the mechanics program. We also have a program for nasal development that basically takes people's capacity to breathe through their nose from like, my nose doesn't want to do this at all, to, hey, I really understand how to use this, and I've actually physically opened the system. And then we have this energy system control, which basically teaches us how to manipulate rate and depth of breath based on my level of output during performance. So there's actually a pretty strong continuum all the way through, from slow and steady with the nose to mouth.
I saw that you were talking about, and I think in one of the articles, just talking about that, it'll help you kind of keep in tune with the metabolic shift, where that mouth is more anaerobic, right? And,
yes.
And then the nose in and mouth out is bumps up, your lactate threshold. And whereas the nose in and nose out breathing is highly aerobic.
Exactly. So the idea is that the closer we get to the mouth, the more anaerobic we are, the more we are in the nose, especially if it's slow, the more aerobic it is.
Good stuff. Now, you had a great video, Breathing for Performance, and you were talking about, in that warm-up, just trying to maintain whatever wattage you can in through the nose, out through the nose, and that'll kind of almost like that's where you're going to start to build up this tolerance, I guess, right? This balance between the pulmonary system and the work, where it'll allow you to eventually, during the workout, you're going to be able to try to stay ahead of that oxygen debt. But I just want you to give us a little bit, and we'll finish up on moving into a recovery process. Talk to us about how you guys use this for recovery.
Well, so there's two things, right, when you're recovering, and there's a couple ways to look at it, right? There's intra-session recovery. Like I have repetitive bouts of activity, whether it's through a sport or whether it's in my training, where I have a high level of activity, I have some time to relax, and then I return to the activity, right? So the idea there is I would want to tune down my nervous system and my cardiorespiratory system as quickly as possible, revert to better sources of energy, and save up other energy systems, higher cost energy systems, for higher burst activities that have more payoff, right? So there's that sort of like intra-session recovery, and we have some protocols for that. One is a superventilation protocol, similar to Wim Hof, right, where I'm prioritizing getting a lot of oxygen into the system as quickly as I can. Then there's sort of post-session or post-game recovery, where the idea is that I want to tune my central nervous system down as quickly as possible, jumpstart the adaptation process, and then also get my state into a calm and alert place as quickly as possible so that I have more access to learning, right? Then I can reflect back on my game or my training session more rapidly and actually have a faster rate of learning because I'm able to focus my mind on what just happened. What mistakes did I make? What worked? What didn't? How can I get better?
Absolutely. So fascinating. So much to learn with all this stuff. And I'll remind everybody they can go to powerspeedendurance.com, and I'll have a link for that. But Rob has this the breath mechanics course, as well as a nasal breathing development course as well. So very cool. Rob, thanks so much for coming on. This
My
stuff
pleasure.
has really been just an amazing journey and fascinating journey into breathing. And obviously I'm just starting on it. So I really appreciate you coming on and giving us an overview of all this stuff. And I hope to come to an Art of Breath workshop as well. For
sure. Yeah, we're going to be in New York in September. We have 2 days in September, actually. And that stuff's on the website. I think our next stop, I'm not sure when this will air, but our next stop is Florence, Italy, later this month in April. And then at the very end of the month, we're in London, then Minneapolis, Nashville, Los Angeles, and then New York. So we're pretty amped. We're moving around a lot. Check out the site. If you go to powerspeedendurance.com/art of breath, all the seminars are listed there. So we'd love to see you guys out. We'd love to have you, Anthony, when we're in New York. Be close by. We won't be very far from you at all.
All right.
Welcome to the Functional Movement Systems segment. My name is John Torine. In part 2, we offered some more questions to ponder, some broad strokes on baselines and framework that may have relevance to your daily practice or coaching. For part 3, we'd like to go over and acknowledge realities that exist and touch on some real-world factors that you may encounter or likely already have encountered in returning an injured athlete to sport, or quite frankly, getting any athlete ready to play or participate. The challenge here is that this is the storm where objective, subjective, common sense, nonsense, logic, ignorance, arrogance, and emotion can crash together. This is the gray area. It may be tough and it may not be. To think that there's not gray area would be a little naive, and that's where things sometimes can get hairy. I do know this. If we err in the best judgment for the athlete, usually things will turn out okay. But what I'd really like to do is make an emotional plea with you. I think many of us have seen, or even some of us have espoused, that graph in presentations where the athlete is put in the middle of a circle, and around that circle or box or square, whatever shape we're using, we've put all the professionals around this person, the doctors and the ATCs and the PTs and strength coaches and psychologists and chiropractors and everybody else. And they all have a line going right to the athlete, and we think that's how we put the athlete in the center, and that may be true. But where is the line around that circle connecting? We all want to go right to the athlete, but are we really putting the athlete in the center when we do this? Are we racing right to the athlete with our ideas and novelties and ego and arrogance and everything that we want to espouse to them? Or do we have the ability to actually work together and connect in our lanes and out of our lanes on behalf of the athlete? And by the way, when we say athlete, is that what we're thinking about? Athletics and sports is just something that they do. And I can assure you, at some point they end. This person may be an athlete. They may be participating in sports or recreation or different activities. But let's not forget, this is a human being. This is a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, a future parent, a future grandparent, aunt or uncle. This person is not a product that we bring to market. I recently heard a company that gives out stars to athletes refer to high school kids as a business. Wow, I about fell out of my chair when I heard that. For those of you that may believe that, the next few minutes probably won't resonate with you a whole lot. For those of you that don't believe that the high school kid is a business, maybe it will. So what does success look like for this child, this young adult? Not your success, theirs. So let's take a look at something. This is an ongoing challenge at this point. There's not an ending to this story, but hopefully this will get you thinking a little bit. So how would you approach something like this? And many of you probably have multiple times, and if you haven't, you likely will. You have a high school female athlete. She's a Division I recruit. She's getting ready to go to college. She tears her ACL in preseason. This is basketball. Of course, she'd like to play in the high school season. And when I say preseason, I'm talking about the summer. So there's a few months to go till basketball. The goal for her would be a big night coming up that is actually less than about 5 months away post-op. Any of those that have been involved with ACLs on any level, from research to applied and anything in between, can already tell you that 5 months is pretty quick for sustainable and long-term success. So if you've been asked to be part of her rehab on any level, what are you going to do first? What are you going to do when you meet her? What if you weren't the first person to meet her? What if you met her in the middle? What if you were just part of the people that were meeting her? So who's involved with this person? Well, you have the kid, the young adult. You have a mom or a dad or guardian. You have an operating surgeon. You have the coach. You might have a high school ATC. You might have a high school strength coach. You might have a PT or rehab clinic and staff that's involved outside of the school or organization, locally or nationally. And if you live in a small town, you may have a lot of community experts every time you go out for a cup of coffee that want to tell you what to do and where is this person and why aren't they playing. So when you look through the lens, if you can actually put on an empathetic lens, we know what each of these people are thinking. The athlete, hey, I just want to play. I need to do this. My college life is slipping away. I don't know what to do. What's going to happen with my future? Parents, guardians, hey, mom wants what's best. Dad wants the scholarship and the bragging rights. The operating surgeon got the best needs of the athlete, hopefully. Hopefully. Are they working with other people to help clear the athlete? The operating surgeon gets excited about return to play. The coach, they're just confused. Do they write her off? How much do they practice her? What do they do? The high school ATC, they've got 1,000 kids they're dealing with. They want to help. Strength coach got 1,000 kids. They want to help. They'd be happy to help. If a PT and rehab clinic, does she have insurance? When's she coming over? We'll get her ready. The PT is excited about getting her ready. The owner of the clinic, he wants to make sure the PT's got good video of her so he can slap it on Instagram with hashtag on the grind and work business that way. Or maybe not. What's sad is the better the player, the more the experts show up. Lots and lots of experts. And I don't mean to sound condescending or degrading here, but this is reality. And the point is we all have a different lens that we're looking at. And so how do you make a determination to clear this person? Of course, the athlete, they feel great. They want to get out there. Mom and dad understands the risk. The coach can still be confused, not sure what's going on. ATC and strength coach are happy to work. What about the PT and the rehab clinic? Do they subjectively clear her? How are we communicating to the high school ATC, the high school coach who's working with her? What about an operating surgeon? Did the operating surgeon clear this person in 5 months with known risks? Why would an operating surgeon do that? Pressure, financial pressure, pressure from a heavyweight in the community? Who communicated around this? Do we have standards and baselines that we communicated on? Now, again, I'm not saying that it's clear. Not everybody's going to return to play with perfect VO2 max, perfect body comp, perfect cognitive processing, or anything of that sort. But we ought to have standards and baselines that we can agree on together around this kid that says that she's ready to go, so the subjectivity, the arrogance, ego, and other things don't enter into the plan. And by the way, like I said, at some point, the sport's going to end. At the same time, if we all agree on everything, then we only need one of us. So I didn't say we're all going to agree on everything. I did say we ought to communicate and stay accountable to each other. And in today's day and age, you know, communicating is supposed to be much easier than it was. We've got texts and emails and phones and all kind of stuff. We can get together. We can reach out to the high school ATC and say, hey, we are working with your athlete. How can we help them? What are you doing? What can we do? How can we help them get better for you and with you? Not to the timeline, not to anything but the best needs of the athlete. So please don't say you don't have time. This is a human being. It's a young person in likely what may be the most challenging emotional state she's ever faced with. Lots of self-doubt, lots of fear. Physical rehab, quite frankly, is tough work, but that's the easy part. So we all know the saying, it's amazing how much can be accomplished if no one cares who gets the credit. I think if we abide by that, we can wrap ourselves around some good people with good agendas that are working on behalf of this child, this young adult. So get your criteria in place, understand who speaks when, what influences do we need to acknowledge, and what outside influences are just noise. Get organized, get a plan together so we're proactive and not reactive. Get accountability together with all the professionals that may have a hand in working with this child, and communicate around. Some of the best phone calls I've ever had personally have been with high school athletic trainers that were just excited and thrilled to know that we were calling and wanted to work with them, wanted to make sure they knew what was going on with the athlete that they're responsible for and the child that they're responsible for. So get your steps, get your methods. You know, what will this athlete have learned 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Will they come back and want to see you because they know you've helped them or not? So it's not the goal that they accomplish. It's really what they become along the way. Hopefully some of that resonated with you. Again, these are people, these are kids, these are human beings. Let's lose some of the fear, some of the ego, some of the arrogance, worried about the social media feeds. And if we do right and we work hard and we're out there putting ourselves out there on behalf of the athlete. We all agree on about 95% of the things. Let's not get caught up in the 5% in front of the athlete and who wins there. That's a losing effort. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening to this series on return to play basics and some realities to hopefully ponder around. My name is John Torine. This has been the Functional Movement System segment. For more information, check out functionalmovement.com.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 230 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now there's free shipping on orders over $59. Restrictions do apply, so check out the site for more info. The summits are coming. I'll be there. I'm speaking in Orlando. The first one is May 30th. That goes to June 3rd. The next one-day seminar is in Tacoma on May 12th with Brandon Marcello, Todd Durkin, Rachel Cosgrove, and Martin Rooney. You can check it out at PerformBetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Rob Wilson for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, and breathing. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Make sure you head over to trainheroic.com. Start your 14-day free trial. Let them know I sent you. The Strength Coach Podcast sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro Edition or Elite Edition. So good stuff there. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. John Torine in Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And of course, remember, you can try StrengthCoach.com out 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to StrengthCoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Retta. Go to ContinueFit.com to sign up for the Success Series. That's 5 audio interviews on the success in the fitness business, which is turning into the book that's coming out this summer. That's what I will be speaking at Perform Better as well, speaking about at Perform Better. So anyway, thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.